All right, so we can begin now. So welcome to Alum at Alma talk. And unlike our previous talks, this particular talk is different in the sense that it's not really related to the research related talks, but more on the journey of one of our alumni who has taken the entrepreneurial route. His name is Prajwal Prakash, and he is co-founder and CTO of Cluso. He graduated from IIT Madras CS 2 years ago. Um, and he's currently the co-founder of Cluso, a Y Combinator backed SaaS startup that uses AI to create software product documentation and videos. Cluso's product is currently used by hundreds of companies across the globe. He previously started Desklamp, a PDF reader for research, while still at IITM. And I was one of the beneficiaries of Desklamp. And it was really a very nice product. And Prajwal and his team had spent a very good amount of time as well as efforts in identifying what are the issues that a researcher as well as a user of a PDF reader has, and had spent time in identifying and addressing those issues. This Desklamp had actually over 25,000 users at its peak. Prajwal was also a recipient of the Dr. Shankar Dayar Sharma Institute Gold Medal at his convocation. So today we are happy to have him as one of as our speaker today, and I'm sure that it will be useful not only to the CS students but also non-CS students. So Prajwal, we have invited non-CS students also because I thought that this will be very useful to a lot of beneficial to a lot of students. So as you can see, there are large number of different students from various departments, and look forward to hearing you. Over to you, Prajwal.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Professor. I'm very happy to hear that you still remember Desklamp, and you were, in fact, one of the earliest testers. So I'm glad that that left some sort of mark. Thank you all who have come here to attend this talk. I'm very happy with this opportunity and excited to tell you more about my journey. So my main aim of coming here is to convince some of you as well to consider starting up, because I think it's a great time to start up, and I would love to see more IITM founded companies. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. So for today's talk, how I thought of doing it is, in the first half, I'll just walk you through my actual journey with Desklamp, because that's what was happening in college. And I think a lot of you will be able to relate to where we started, and you might be able to learn from some of the mistakes and some of the things that we did right in getting Desklamp to grow. Then I'll talk about why I decided to go full time into a startup, what were some of the things that were playing in my mind, which again might resonate with some of you. I'll talk about post that, how we raised funds and our journey into Y Combinator and going to the Silicon Valley hub of startups. Then I think it'll actually be quite fun to show you Cluso, the product that I'm currently working on, and have like a small technical discussion around it, so that that would be interesting, and it would also show you how even just a very small team of software developers can build a product that actually adds value. And finally, I'll just end with a quick note on why right now is a great time for you, especially to start up. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, which was building Desklamp. So we started Desklamp when we were in our second year. It was a team of three of us. We were very close friends from first year and throughout second year of college. And this was when COVID had hit. So to be very honest, the initial motivation we had to even start working on something like a project was boredom. All student clubs had ended, all C5 projects were put on hold, there was so much uncertainty. So we had a lot of time on our hands and nothing really to do. So that was the not so great story of behind of how we thought of starting up. But the problem statement that we started with was quite interesting. So we picked something that we could relate to. And this wasn't a very conscious decision, but it turns out that's a great way to pick an idea to start working on something. So the problem we were facing at that time was with reading PDFs. Now we had just gone into this virtual world of having to do everything online. We had to interact with each other, both our professors and our peers in our classes, all online. And even in the few 1 or 2 weeks that we started doing this, we started to feel the challenge. There was nothing that could compare to the feeling of, sitting across someone and writing on a piece of paper as you work through a problem together, or as you're talking about some particular section of your text. So that's when it kind of occurred to us that software could potentially solve this issue, the same way how Google Docs or Google Slides kind of solved the collaboration issue in creating these documents. We felt that there was a gap in scientific consumption of PDFs, right? So when we started, we didn't have any grand vision of the product. The main thing we really wanted to solve is sometimes in the text, you'll have this one section that's maybe talking about a particular equation or a particular diagram, but then that continues on for multiple pages and you can no longer see the diagram. So when you're working with a physical book, it's not too bad. It's very easy to flip back and forth, but it was very hard digitally. So we started with that one feature of clipping things out. That was what we wanted to build, the ability to clip out something and view it on the side of your PDF as you read. So this is where I want to walk you through how we actually got started, right? So on the technical front, one of the things that I think we did right, and I've seen a lot of projects at Insti fail, uh, is spending too much time trying to get everything perfect, right? We didn't spend a lot of time learning any new technology or even trying to pick something. We just went forward, picked some framework that made sense. So in our particular use case, because we were building an offline first PDF reader, we wanted it to work with desktop files and be installable and essentially replace your PDF reader. We went with Electron.js. So we didn't spend too much time learning Electron.js. The best way to go about building a project that you're hoping to turn into a product that actual people use is to just get started with some sort of boilerplate and build from there. So the idea is you don't need to have 100% understanding of the framework. You're probably smart if you're listening to this talk on this call. You're definitely smart enough to get into this college. So you will be able to pick up on the nuances of the framework as and when you encounter problems. So we started with this boilerplate. There was this framework called PDF.js. Again, the beauty of building software is abstraction. So we didn't have to dive too deep into PDF.js at the very beginning. Started building some features on top of it. So the key was getting to some feature that we personally felt was useful. So once we had that feature of being able to clip out a diagram and keep it on the side, we started to feel like it's more useful than the PDF readers that we were using. By we, I still mean just the three of us, right? And that's where the next part of getting started comes in, which is on the non-technical side, you need to find users for your product. So in our case, this was uh, quite straightforward because we were building for our needs and everyone we knew was also a student. So we just reached out to our friends within our departments, within our wings, within our hostels, got them to start using it. We got Professor Rupesh, for example, to actually start using. This was like in the early days when it was still called Kitab. And the thing is, people are far, far more forgiving in that sort of environment, right? When you're a college student building something, the standard to which your software is going to be held is lower, and that's a very good thing in getting your first beta users. It's okay if there are bugs. It's okay if there are some things that are a little not well thought out. The idea behind these users is these are a trusted set of people who will give you valuable feedback. So I remember even to this day, Professor Rupesh sent us this really long mail walking through very minute pieces of feedback around when I add a post-it note on the PDF, it doesn't really drag properly with my cursor, those kind of things. So that is exceptionally useful because that allows you to improve the product. And this creates a feedback loop for you. So you get something out in front of people in front of someone in your network, get them to give you feedback, use that to improve the product, and keep iterating. So this is also where you learn more on the technical side on how to implement things or where some bugs are coming from, right? You don't try to solve everything from the get-go. As and when you get feedback is how you keep building. So this was the process we kind of did for about 4 to 5 months when we realized we actually had started to build something of value. So some learnings from those days, again, it's a point that I've been iterating on a lot, which is don't try to get things perfect very fast. So especially if you're a engineer and if you've been studying CS, this is something that will go against like your natural instinct because you've been kind of trained to spot mistakes and just ensure any code that you write is the most efficient piece of code, which is also great. But at the same time, It's very important to know what problems are worth solving and what can be pushed to a later date. So, for example, we took 3 months to ship notebooks because there were some minor bugs related to grabbing highlights from the PDFs and adding them to a notebook on the side of the PDF reader. So, in hindsight, that was a really bad call because we could have had notebooks shipped earlier and gotten more valuable feedback around, our highlights in the notebook actually needed? Do they actually work better outside? So as long as you're shipping fast, it's okay. So the one caveat I'd say, the most important kind of bugs to take care of when you're building a product in the hands of actual users is, as long as you don't lose user data, everything else is okay. It's okay if your product crashes. It's okay if it's down for a few days. The only real problem that causes people to leave you in this very early stage is if they've spent a lot of time and it's just gone forever, whatever output that they were hoping to get. Next, another very important point is be very selective in shipping features. What often tends to happen is we get excited at the start of a project, especially in college, where like you basically want to solve everything. So it's very important to whittle it down and build in very, very small phases and be very deliberate about what you're choosing to build. And again, get users really early. Your product, whenever you think your product is not ready, chances are it is. So err on the side of getting people to try it early. So those are some of the learnings from the early stage. Another uh, piece that I think will be very relevant to you is how to balance college work alongside building a product and learning new kinds of software development. Again, ruthless prioritization. Learn to say no. So that's not just in terms of when you're actually building your product, but even other opportunities that college presents, right? So to be clear, I'm not saying you stop having fun with your friends or stop doing any of those things. That's not required to continue to build a product that eventually turns into a startup. But it is important to start saying no to the vast myriad of opportunities that come up your way. For example, you might have to say no to one of the intercollegiate fests. You might have to spend, maybe instead of watching 2 movies a week with your friends, you watch one every 2 or 3 weeks. So you will have to learn to prioritize a bit. But again, the idea is as you start building your product and you get some early traction, early users, this also starts to become easier for you because you're more motivated to continue to work on your idea. Another thing that was really, really useful for us was keeping our professors in the loop, right? Of course, for us, it was even more directly useful because they were potentially end users of the product. But even in their capacity as professors, professors will try to help you. So if you're sincerely trying to build something, they will work with you and find ways that they can ease up some of your either academic load or assist you in getting to talk to the right people to further your idea. So for us, something that was super helpful was finding a way to map this to credits. So of course, it totally depends on the kind of product you're building. I am primarily talking about software-heavy products in the CS department, but of course, if you are from other departments, you will still find professors sympathetic to your cause if it's something in your domain, right? So of course, you can go for BTP, UGRC credits, but you can also, in any course you do, you can find opportunities to connect it to your product. So one of the examples that I remember quite distinctly is there's a secure systems course in the CS department, and we made our final project around building security in Desklamp, which is something we anyway wanted to do as we were getting customers using slightly more sensitive PDFs. So we made that into our project and used that for course credits. So you will have to be a bit enterprising and think a bit out of the box on how to make your project fit into academic curricula. But it's very doable, and it's also great training for you if you do decide to continue your startup or product full time, because this skill is what's needed to raise funds and convince other employees as well. Okay, so that was kind of covering my time in college building Desklamp. And once we had a sort of stable product, the next step was actually trying to grow it. So here, a tip that I think we didn't know that is super useful is start tracking analytics easy. Even when you have just a few users, you get a very different picture from talking to them versus actually getting data about how they're using your product. So there are good solutions now to make tracking analytics easy. There's something called Postdoc, which is what we use at Cluso. But at Desklamp, we had to build like our own custom analytics pipeline. You should also build very easy mechanisms to facilitate any kind of support and feature requests. What you don't want is if you've built a piece of software or a product and somebody doesn't really know what to do and they just leave and you find out about it 2 weeks later. So these sort of things seem like they're not very important, especially when you have maybe 5 or 6 users who are your friends, but it actually makes a world of difference. So this chart that I've put on the right is actually our user chart of Desklamp. So you can see how even though the core product didn't grow as much from say Feb to October, you can see the huge spike in users that happened because we started following some of these healthier practices. We were reaching out to users based on analytics, understanding the minor things that maybe they didn't understand or we didn't understand about their workflow, and making smaller improvements to the product. On the non-technical side, this is something which I've seen, especially folks from my batch and my department really struggle with, which is the idea of, okay, let's say we've built the software, what do we do around that? So one mindset shift that I found really helped is don't think of sales as pushing the product onto other people. Try to think of yourself as a doctor. So if you're on the right track with a product that's actually solving a problem, the idea is you get the person in front of you to describe their problems and help them see how it's a solution to it. So you're not trying to force them to use your product. You're trying to genuinely solve their problem by using your product. So once you make that mindset shift, actually sales is a really, really enjoyable activity even for a developer, because it's very satisfying to have that pattern kind of fit into place based on your hypothesis when you go into the call. So that was kind of our journey growing Desklamp. So you can see by around October 2023, we had grown it to a fairly steady 500 odd weekly active user number. We had around 25,000 signups who had used it by this point. So weekly active, by the way, is people who are using it over 40 minutes a day. So we were very happy with the usage. But this is when we kind of encountered the next challenge, which is this was around this time, actually, around maybe May, June, I had to make the call whether or not to go full time or not. So, to give you some idea of where I was at that point in life, I had already done an intern with a big tech company and had a PPO in a good role. And the other opportunity that was exciting to me was more research in like this niche field of quantum computing that I had also really enjoyed working with, right? So here, uh, I think some of the factors that helped me decide to go full time that may or may not apply to you, but I think are some of the better reasons to decide to do your startup or build your product full time. So the first is actually team. So in my experience post college and interacting with founders across the globe, what I've seen is that one of the most important things is your team, right? So college is a great place to find a team that's actually going to stick it through. So they're people who are your friends, they're equally smart, equally motivated, and that's like the biggest asset, right? So, for example, a bad reason to try to go full time is pure conviction on your idea, because ideas are very likely to change unless you've gotten some sort of significant traction. There are things in the market that may change. There are, competitors that may kick in. So, idea isn't the best reason to go full time. Team is a great reason. The other great reason, according to me, is the actual life, your actual job description of being a founder. So for me, what I really enjoyed in by this point in building Desklamp was the breadth of problems you get to solve. So generally speaking, when you become a software developer, what happens at slightly larger companies is you're positioned to solve one part of a product in one particular team. So that really helps you get a lot of in-depth experience at something. Like, let's say maybe if you're a front-end engineer, you get a lot of core experience with, say, React or Angular, whatever framework your company uses. But when you're owning a product end to end, that's when you can kind of own the entire tech stack and also have growth problems. So when you're in your early stages, the problems that matter aren't as much as when you have more customers. You need to start worrying about things like scaling up. You may need to split services on your backend into multiple services. So for me, that technical role was very exciting, being, not having it stagnate, having it grow depending on the growth of the product. Besides that, I also, like I mentioned, started to enjoy the aspect where you talk to other people, you talk to users of your product, You learn more about their workflows and add more value. That whole chain was really good. And finally, I think another thing that is sort of important is right out of college is when, again, varies from person to person, but it's generally when you have the lowest commitments to in terms of either your personal life or your family life. Plus, especially if you've lived in insti, you are not too concerned about a really massive salary because you're used to living in hostels and uh, everything along those sorts. So you don't have a very high standard of life, and that's actually a big asset because you're ready to tough it out for a while. So what happened to me at this point is I had decided to go full time. My two co-founders were in a 5-year program, so they were going to continue to stay in college. So after graduating in 2022, I continued to stay in college and work with them. But we did need some way to start growing the company. So that's when we had to worry about raising funds. So as a college student, there are actually lots of opportunities for you to raise funds. So I would say, uh, economics isn't too much of a concern just because of the sheer amount of opportunities available to you right now. So of course, we have our own IITM, Nirman and UGFIR program, which is like a great base. But apart from that, there are lots of private VCs which give grants that are super useful. So we won prizes at TIE, Antler, excuse me, Grad Capital, Titan Capital. So these are all venture capital firms that like to support college startups. There's even one now coming up by Nikhil Kamath. So generally speaking, you have an advantage by virtue of being from IITM. And I would strongly encourage you to explore these opportunities and apply. Again, what matters here is by this point, ideally, if you have some sort of product that you have traction with, is when you are more likely to get into these programs. But they're just very useful to keep in mind when you're evaluating your decision about whether to continue with the product or not. Okay. Then around this point, when we were raising funds, is when we applied to YC. So YC, which is Y Combinator, is like the world's leading startup accelerator. So if you think of companies like Reddit, Airbnb, Twitch, all of these came from YC. So even OpenAI, which is like the hottest company right now, its founder was originally the partner at YC. So YC has a great history of software companies, and we were quite lucky to get in. So our journey with YC was very interesting. So the partners basically made a bet on us because we could build software and build software that some people wanted. So their whole thesis is based on if you can build a product and get people who actually benefit in some way from that product, you can pivot into something that's can become a big company, right? So for us, that was like a big culture shock. At that point, once I decided to go full time, the idea of being an entrepreneur and the idea of pursuing Desklamp were very tightly interconnected. So that was like the first misconception I had that was changed in the valley, which is that your idea is not linked to your journey as an entrepreneur, right? Ideas change. So pivoting was ridiculously common. People change what they're working on. In fact, it's better to change it fast rather than late. So for us, the main reason we had to pivot was monetization. So in so many ways, Desklamp was a great product for us to get started with. We had users, in our common network. We could relate to the problem. The problem is we fine-tuned it for students and researchers, and we were struggling with monetization on the product. So the learning there was, yeah, we would probably be able to turn it into some sort of revenue generating company. But once you get an inkling of the market not being big enough, it makes sense to change because building a product is hard. You're going to spend a lot of time on it. So it's better to chase a slightly bigger opportunity. That being said, even when you're generating new ideas, it's better to focus on your own experiences or experiences of people you're really close to and you can draw from. So, for example, if your parents are in a particular industry or if your siblings are in a particular industry, those are very interesting use cases for you to explore. So, another thing that, especially as a CS engineer, you're tempted to do is go solution first. So, when we were in YC, this was in December 2022, Jan 2023 is when applied AI was really becoming a thing. Like LLMs had been commoditized thanks to OpenAI. And the possibilities there were very exciting to me. But that's not the best way to think about it. That is a great reason to consider a new idea. But when you're thinking of your new idea, always go problem first. It's very easy to get into the trap of making like a magical AI solution to something, but it's not really a problem. So go problem first and then find uh, a solution that potentially involves AI. So what stood out to us after when we were, in this pivoting journey was a problem we faced at Desklamp, which was videos and support articles. So what we had experienced is that videos are actually really, really important when you're building a software company. So when we were trying to spread Desklamp, our video actually was really critical. So I think it has maybe 18, 19,000 views on YouTube and was directly responsible for a lot of the users we got. But making that video was very, very challenging. So uh, we had to, we didn't want to use our voices for the video, so we went to someone in the music club in college and like convinced her to come and spend like an entire day recording it with, her actual mic and everything. We got one of our designer friends to spend another day actually beautifying the video and making assets. And we had to spend a lot of our time as the devs to go back and forth between these people and just make sure that the video was making sense. And of course, if even one resource is missing or isn't up to the mark, like if your designer isn't great or your voice actor isn't great, the entire video quality suffers. And in our case, it wasn't too critical to get other languages, but in our experience talking to other people building software, you ideally want to support your users and create marketing content, support content across languages. So then this becomes a repeatable process for every language. So our problem statement was, do we really need so many people? Is there a solution that can allow only the person who knows the product to kind of create this content? So that's where Cluso comes in. So I'll just reshare my screen and walk you folks through Cluso. Okay. So Cluso, the idea behind Cluso is anyone who knows the product, which in software companies is typically the product manager, developer, a customer success manager. Exact role is not so important, but somebody who knows the product first creates a base recording, and then that's where all these other stakeholders come and add value. So our aim is to do that through AI. So your input to Cluso is going to be a simple screen recording where you walk through your product or walk through some feature on your product. So as an example, what I'm going to do is pretend I'm a PM at Google and I'm trying to explain how to use Google Docs, right? So my workflow, if I want to use Cluso to create content around this, would be to use our Chrome extension and start a new recording. So this is very similar to how when you share your screen on Meet, you basically pick your tab and you get started. So what I'm going to do is record a very informal video just explaining it, and then we'll see how Cluso transforms that base recording. Okay, in this video, we'll look at how to enable notification settings on a Google Doc. So to do that, first you can click on Tools, then go to Notification Settings. Here you'll see an option for added or removed content. So you can select that. And finally, you can click OK. So now whenever any of your collaborators make any edits to your document, you'll get an email about the same. So I made a very informal video, didn't prepare the script. When I was done, I just clicked stop sharing. So now what's happening in the background is Cluso is processing this video, right? So on the like slight technical discussion side, it's a very fun problem because there are lots of things happening in parallel. So what we were doing is as we were recording, we were creating chunks of the video because your recording can be arbitrarily long. So the first thing that we had to do was, okay, Cluso is done. So I'll explain the technical process maybe in just a second. So what you're seeing on your screen is the first draft of your Cluso article. So by default, Cluso converts every video into two pieces of content, an article and a video. So the article is this step-by-step guide with screenshots that explains everything that you want to do. So you'll notice how it's added an intro based on cues it got from my speech. It's added very concise, crisp steps on exactly what to do. It's even tried to bold the UI element that's at play. And it's also added these screenshots automatically. So here what we kind of realized is actually creating this document takes a lot of time. Even I know exactly what to do. To sit and type it out from scratch, collect these visual elements is really hard. So that's another powerful idea when you're building software. Just understanding someone's workflow to doing something and making that much simpler is very valuable to a business. So here, for example, ordinarily the designer would now have to exit the software, go to some other tool, edit the screenshot to create collateral. That you can do from within Cluso itself. So you can add all sorts of elements, zoom in, zoom out. So one thing that I think would be quite fun to show you guys is the arrow. So the reason I think it's fun is there's this very popular meme that trigonometry that you study is never used anywhere, and like who cares about Pythagoras theorem and all that sort of stuff. But actually, this feature of ours, like drawing an arrow, is quite heavily dependent on trigonometry. So it's basically a rectangle that's being made, and the corners of the rectangle are the arrow. So when we're rendering it, there's quite a bit of inverse trigonometry that's at play. So I just thought that would be interesting to you, especially those of you who just started your BTech. It's interesting how some of these concepts come back. So that kind of covers the article piece. So the idea is with just that video, you're done. Now it's ready to be used wherever you want it to. I'll now cover a bit about the video. So I'll just reshare my screen. Oops. Because I want to share the audio as well. So this video that's made is initially with my original audio. Sorry. Isn't it similar to the Windows step recorder? Oh, I'm not familiar with that, Atish. I don't believe there is a native Windows tool. There are lots of tools that do this in bits and pieces, especially the article piece. But yeah, we've built an edge in the article by realizing that finally, no matter how much you do automatically, it's best to have it be editable. So it's basically a Google Doc inside this. So that way, if there are any things that the AI messes up, there's still a human that can be in the loop and fix it from right here. Okay, so for the video, right now it's still my original audio. Can one just in this, if you can hear my audio video, we look at how to enable notifications. Yeah, were you able to hear that?
Yeah, you're right.
Yes, 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 please.
Okay, lovely. So yeah, so it starts out with my original audio. And like I said, it was very informal. I'm not in the best environment to record my audio track and everything. And there's another deeper problem, which is if you're building software in India or Southeast Asia and you're selling to the US, you probably want an American accent in place. So one of Cluso's standout features is replacing your audio track seamlessly. So on the left here is a transcript. So it's again been enhanced through a LLM powered pipeline where it's taken my script and just basically fixed up the grammar, made some minor changes to just make it a bit better. So what I can do now is pick a voice. So depending on my customer segment, depending on my user persona, I'll pick a voice that makes the most sense. So for example, for now, I'm just going to pick Matilda and I'll hit generate speech. So now what Cluso is doing in the background is we're making a AI voiceover based on this new script. And we're also going to sync that to the video. So we are not the ones who create this AI voiceover. There's another company called 11 Labs that provides us with the API to turn text into voice. But what we do focus on is syncing that with the video. So if you think about it, arbitrarily changing the script, changing the audio, your worst case scenario is something entirely different is happening on screen and something else is being said. So that's the problem that we realized exists in the workflow of AI voiceovers, and that's what we fixed. So I'll just add a small background track and let's see our video.
In this video, we will guide you through the process of enabling notification settings on a Google Doc. Begin by clicking on Tools, then navigate to the Notification settings. Here, you will find an option for Added or Removed Content. Select this option. Lastly, confirm your selection by clicking OK. Now, whenever any changes are made to your document by your collaborators, you'll receive an email notification.
Awesome. So that was the core of Cluso. You would have also noticed we added these automatic zoom effects. So basically what we've done is we've taken this niche of creating videos around software content and really tried to make all of those workflows easier. So one of the most common animations, for example, is the zoom animation. So we add that automatically based on the clicks you make during your recording. Another thing that's very common is branding. So this, for example, is the Cluso account. So we add Cluso branded outro and intro to every video. So for all of our customers, that makes it very straightforward for them to create these videos end to end. And finally, when you're happy with, let's say, the English version of the content, and now I want to unlock a different language, I just start translating and pick another language. So again, on a technical note, this was very interesting to make because basically, in a lot of these features, you'll find that the end experience is very seamless and really great for the user. But it's fundamentally just taking in a workflow and making it much, much tighter, right? That's the power of software and why I think there are so many opportunities available today. So I'll just show you the Hindi guide as well once it gets done. So yeah, there's just this one-click button to translate all your content into Hindi. So the challenge that we saw with translation, for example, for articles, you can of course use something like Google Translate, but your experience of getting a fully constructed article with your screenshots and all the edits that you have intact is quite tricky. And similarly for the video, right? Actually creating a video with a different voiceover is quite challenging. But for us now, it's extremely straightforward and easy to get this exact same video that we made in a variety of other languages. So I'll just show you the Hindi version. And again, so to give you some context, all of what you're seeing on screen has been built by just two engineers. So me and my co-founder CEO Akash. So the point I'm trying to make is it's very easy
इस
to
वीडियो
build
में
software
हम
today.
आपको गूगल डॉक पर नोटिफिकेशन सेटिंग्स को इनेबल करने की दर्शन करेंगे। शुरुआत करें टूल्स पर क्लिक करके, फिर नोटिफिकेशन सेटिंग्स पर जाएं। यहां आपको एडेड और रिमूव्ड कंटेंट का एक विकल्प मिलेगा। इस विकल्प को चुनें। अंत में ओके पर क्लिक करके अपनी चयन की पुष्टि करें। अब जब भी आपके सहयोगियों द्वारा आपके डॉक्यूमेंट में कोई बदलाव किया जाएगा, आपको एक ईमेल नोटिफिकेशन प्राप्त होगी।
Great. Yeah, I think that covers what I wanted to show you folks about Cluso. So, like I was saying, this is fundamentally a new opportunity that has been created because of AI technologies. So we didn't create AI voice, we didn't create LLMs. And there are people right now using both of those things in a very broken workflow to create videos like these. But we're at this point where core technology like foundational LLM models and speech to text to speech models, they are far ahead of the actual applications right now. So I think a good analogy is like when the iPhone got created, the tech was there, the distribution was there, but there wasn't those software apps that fundamentally changed our life still hadn't been made. So that's a great opportunity and space to kind of be in. I think we're very lucky, our generation to be young in this phase, because I think in our experience talking to other founders and even in dealing with customers is it's proven to be a huge advantage. You can just put in way more hours as compared to other founders and other companies. So another final important point, especially when looking at software companies, is you can build something very valuable while being very lean. So we've still been like a team of 3, and like Professor Rupesh said at the start of the call, we're able to serve over 150 companies, which is quite crazy. And I think that's the beauty of software. So I think at YC, one of the quotes that really stood out to me is that the ability to build software is kind of like magic in a muggle's world. So I think that kind of concludes my talk. I'd love to hear more questions from you folks. If any of you are actually thinking of starting up or you have some ideas, I'd be happy to talk through more of those.
May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Snehal.
Hi, Prajwal. Firstly, thanks for the great talk. I was just wondering if you could dive deep into the YC application, and like once you have some traction as well and you have some users as well, but then how to make a compelling application and And the whole process of your YC application, did you reach out to people before
Oh,
uh, applying and stuff like that?
yeah, that's a great question. So fundamentally, YC is looking for one thing, which is actually two things. One is, can you build software? So to prove that, the proof is not in how good your product is, but the proof is in have people kind of used it? Have you gotten some kind of traction? So if you have that, the other thing they're looking for is, do you have clarity in explaining why you're doing things, right? Because especially with startups, it's very easy to get lost in jargon or in things that feel like work but aren't work, right? So a good example of this is overhiring. Like if you have a team of 5 or 6 people, or if there's a lot of people, that's not a good sign, because that means you're not able to focus and really prioritize. So what they're looking for in the app is, can you explain your ideas really concisely without going deep into jargon? So some of the most important questions, so if you've done the written form, some of the most important questions are just, when they ask you to explain your idea, they're not necessarily evaluating the idea itself. They're evaluating how simply are you thinking about it, how are you explaining why it's kind of necessary. They're looking at that more than the actual idea itself. Another very important answer that's overlooked is, again, they're betting on you, the people, more than the idea. So there's a question around like, what systems have you hacked outside of like a technical system? So there also they're trying to see, uh, can you get things done? Can you find a way to achieve your goals? So for us, for example, that answer was quite strong because of what I mentioned in terms of balancing college. We went out of our way to find ways to, get credits, get some sort of, way to work on Desklamp more full time, or in my case, actually staying back in college and just working on it. So those kind of things become quite important. So if you have an application, I'd be happy to help you out next time. I think you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can give you more granular tips on your specific app.
Sure, Prajwal, that would be great. I'll get in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Okay, no worries.
Hello. Hello, Prajwal.
Hi, hey Akhil. Yeah, go
Hi,
ahead.
hi. That was a nice demo, and I have a few questions, like couple of questions. Like, does this
Sure.
product relates to the code development documentation also?
Yeah, that's a very interesting use case. So we have had a few pilots around it, like especially because today most documentation, I mean, besides like well-written code and self-documenting code and all that, typically there's an onboarding call where when new employees come in, a senior developer walks them through some of the like core repos and architecturally how things are structured. So that on call, what happens is what you can replace with a video, but the challenge there, what we've seen is, yeah, while it is a good use case, it's not a key use case for us because it's a very, uh, how do I put it? It's more of a culture problem than the video itself not being good. Like with documentation type of issues, the issue is uh, the sorry, the company doesn't make documentation regularly, so getting anyone to start recording videos no matter how good the tool is proves to be a challenge. Whereas in the main segment we focus on, which is B2B software companies, for them, if they're selling software, they absolutely want to ensure that the content is top notch. So with or without us, they will be making that content. It's just that with us it's better and faster. So that's why we're focusing more on software companies. But yeah, things like developer documentation, things like internal team training for like say HR teams on HR software, all that is also very interesting use cases for us.
Okay. And one more question, like there are few other softwares which generate the animated videos to publicize a product or any solution for the marketing purposes. So how do you relate this with those products, and what's a new thing in this?
Yeah, so for us, I think the user persona itself is different. Like most tools are tools for designers. For us, we are empowering like the person who knows the product best, so whether that's the product manager or the customer success manager. That's who our user is. We want them to be able to own the video lifecycle end to end. Most traditional tools, like anything pre uh, a year or so ago, were all like catered to designers. So think something like Premiere Pro, which is what most designers use. It's quite hard to use. It's basically like an entire skill set learning how to use. But using Cluso is very, very easy to just get started. Like I just recorded a video and I'm done. The other thing is, I think AI voiceovers need to be very tightly linked to your editor. because there are a lot of issues related to sync. So that's one of the main reasons people use us, which is if you arbitrarily change the voiceover, especially if you add a voiceover in a new language, you need to make sure like sync is maintained on your own. And in some cases, you don't even know the language. So for example, now with Cluso, I can create a Spanish video without even knowing Spanish and be confident that the sync is in place. So that's kind of where we edge. Okay, somebody's asking what's the second YC startup. So there's a batchmate of mine called Anirudh Sriram. He was an elect. So they just got in, like they'll be joining the new batch. So they're also still kind of figuring out their idea, but it's going to be around code generation, AI-powered code generation. So after ITM, he did do a master's in Stanford. So 2 years are getting over, which is when he'll be joining. But yeah, still another ITM company, so I'm quite happy.
Hi, could I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Arun.
So before building, were you somewhat familiar with Electron.js and the other things that you used, or was it you guys just picked it and then started because you guys had this idea?
It was the latter. We had like zero experience building anything in like with any framework basically. Like the only experience I had with coding was DSA related stuff in like Python and CPP that I did through coursework, but no actual experience building an application. So there's a lot of good open source content out there for you to start building something. So generally speaking, the hardest thing with software is the boilerplate to get up and going. Once you have something, augmenting that is kind of easy. So we started with there was some open source React PDF package that we started with and like just built a basic Electron renderer on that. Then we started building our core features on top of that. Then eventually over time, that entire code got replaced because it like started being a limiter, but that happens later. So yeah, don't spend time learning a framework or gaining experience. Start building something, it will come.
I have another question. May I ask?
Sure, go ahead, Snehal.
So yeah, you said that you used like basically you used available LLMs for some part of the product, right? So I was wondering
Absolutely.
uh, whether you had access to the OpenAI enterprise version, or how did you basically, or did you like instruction tune your own model, or how was that process like? How
That's a
did
good
you
question. So,
incorporate
right,
an
right.
LLM? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for like 99% of use cases, it will always make sense to start with a third party API provider. So the reason is
Yeah.
uh, those models are like the biggest, they're the most powerful, most resilient. You don't want to handle the
Mhm,
overhead of like managing your own model and all of that when you have to get your core application right. Then the idea is as you grow, you'll figure out what LLM works for you best when one of the things becomes a limiting factor, either latency or cost. Otherwise, like the best model out there is generally always one of the like either Anthropic or OpenAI's model, right? Their best model is generally the best in
mhm,
terms of
mhm,
performance and understanding. It's latency and cost that become your
mhm,
two limiting factors. So again, early on, when you don't have users, generally neither of those two things matter too much. Latency might, if you're building like some sort of real-time use case.
mhm,
But even then, I would say stick to third-party providers until it becomes very critical. This is if you're building an applied AI company where your
yeah.
core value add is around, integrating these tools into some sort of workflow and building a product around that. Like, don't even
And
think about open source models, basically.
so wasn't it costly initially? Like, did you? Are there
Yeah,
any?
that's where that slide where I was talking about as a college student, you have access to these programs becomes really important. So, for example, with
Okay.
Nirman, you get AWS credits, push them and start getting OpenAI credits as well. Like I'm sure they will give it. So even for us, now we're a YC funded company, so cost isn't the biggest factor, but even then we get credits from OpenAI, from AWS. Generally, all of these companies they don't want to make money off of startups like these big API providers, cloud providers. They're not aiming to make money out of student startups. So even if they don't have an official student program, just try reaching out to them. Chances are high you'll get some sort of credits.
Okay. That sounds great. Actually, thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, Pranav is asking, how did you take care about licensing issues when using open source software? So yeah, there are well-defined licenses. I've forgotten the specifics right now, but basically every license has some terms of usage. So we just picked ones that are free for like commercial usage. And otherwise, also sometimes in some cases for your very early prototype, it's okay to pick a slightly stricter license which you can't monetize because you know you can sub out that code later. But we didn't have to do that. We used everything that we used. I'm forgetting whether it was MIT license 3 or something, forgetting the exact license name. But basically, there's well written documentation around what licenses you can use in a product and then sell the product versus what licenses, if you use, you have to keep the product open source and not monetize. So if you're careful about that, you'll be good.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Puneet.
Yeah. How did you get your initial customers of Cluso? And
Yeah,
what was
that's
the
a
GTM
great question.
strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that's like a point I actually forgot to mention. You have another big advantage by virtue of being an IITM, which is IITM alumni. So some of our earliest customers were, I mean, both YC alumni and IITM alumni. So again, IITM startups help each other. So if you're building a startup, I'd be happy to try and be one of your early customers as co-founder of Cluso. So that's where you start off getting like initial users, as in, I mean, like the beta users, like Professor Rupesh was for Desklamp, those kind of users. Once you start getting some proof of product market fit, then you have to be a little bit more aggressive. So Neil focuses full time on that. Neil is our third co-founder. So again, with B2B, there are some well-defined playbooks on how to start getting reach. So for us, for example, LinkedIn has proven to be a great inbound channel. So we're very active on LinkedIn, post a lot. I think a lot of you are already connected. So then that creates some name recognition so that when that problem occurs to them or we see them visiting the site, like there are tools to track who visits your site. We can reach out and say, hey, are you interested in this? And set up a call. We go to conferences a lot. That helps in getting initial customers. So yeah, it's fairly well defined. Yeah, the initial customers part can be hard, especially for a B2B idea. Initially, you have to leverage networks. Then once you have some product market fit, it's conferences, inbound because of socials, and one channel I'm forgetting. Referrals, yeah. The existing customers get email.
Yeah, got it.
Okay,
Thanks.
when using LLMs, what about open source and inference engines regularly? Why don't you guys prefer this option? Again, it boils down to the only reason to prefer an open source LLM at this point is latency and cost, and even then it's not worth it. So another good analogy I got from YC that I like using is think of innovation as a resource. So there's only so much of it that you have when you're building a product, right? You don't want to spend it on too many things. Like there are a few core things you can do. So innovating on what LLM you're using is not going to make too much of a difference of what your product is able to build. So don't worry too much about uh, what model you're using. Like if you need to use an open source LLM, it'll become abundantly clear to you because of costs or because there's some particular task in your pipeline that's very easy in contributing to a lot of the costs. So for example, with Cluso, you may have noticed when I created that video, it automatically added a title. That is also LLM powered. That is a use case which I think even a smaller, simpler model would be able to do. And where earlier, when I was using GPT-4, it might have been costly. But now, 4 Omni came out, it's become cheap again, not a priority. So I'd strongly say don't worry too much about what LLM you're using in open source or not.
Hey Prajwal, I hope I'm audible. Uh, First of all, thank you so much for explaining all the nitty-gritties of starting your own company. So I wanted to ask you that, like from the talk that you gave, I got to know that choosing an LLM or choosing be an AI focused company rather than focusing more on AI, like are you suggesting that we should focus more on the software engineering side or like building the product, making it more user friendly, or we should also give a little bit more focus on what models to use or how the pipeline should be?
Okay, I kind of understood your question. So in practice, right, like now that we use LLM in production, there are of course some very unique challenges that come by virtue of using LLMs. But at its core, it's an API. It's the same way how I use a transcription API to like initially convert my text, my speech into text. At its core, using an LLM for an applied AI company is using an API. It's not that tricky to get your prototype running. Yes, once you start scaling up and you have more customers, there are some unique challenges that come in, like especially because your underlying model will change, your use cases will change. So you have to iterate on your pipeline, how you chain your LLM calls. All that sort of comes in. But at its core, it's using an API. Like you don't have to fully understand or be like a AI researcher to use LLMs, right? It's the same way how you're probably able to get value out of ChatGPT right now. The question is, if you have a GPT API, what can you build with that? So yeah, I would strongly say, again, it's not about focusing on either software engineering or AI. If you are looking to kind of build a startup, it's about focusing on solving problems. And why I said AI in particular makes it a good time is there are some problems which weren't solvable with software alone. For example, pre AI, converting a video that I make informally into like a Spanish video that's super high quality. Pre AI, that was just impossible. Like the reason that software doesn't exist is the tech wasn't there, right? So there are new opportunities for software to come in and leverage this kind of tech. So that was the kind of point I was making. I would say it's not like you have to focus on one or the other, but again, in practice, using AI in your application is quite straightforward. Like the first prototype that I had, now we have some quite advanced tooling towards using AI, but the first prototype was literally like a fetch API request. That's it. It was just a hard coded string that I had that just API call goes through, response comes in, and that's put back in. That is the practical experience of using it.
Hi Prajwal.
Okay.
This is Gopal, a recent faculty in the CS department. So great talk, by the way. I sometimes wish I could go back to my undergrad days. So great talk. I had a couple
Very
of
happy to hear that,
questions.
sir.
Couple of questions though. One is typically in the software world, right? There is always a trade-off between. I don't know if it's a trade-off, but I just wanted your opinion on it. That there's one thing to get as many users as you can before thinking about monetization, and then maybe you could, once you have enough user base, then you could figure out how to monetize and so on, versus having a monetization strategy right away and growing with the user base. Is there a trade-off, or is there companies that would pick one over the other, or how does that work actually?
Absolutely. That's a really great question. And I have experiences on both sides. So with Desklamp, we were kind of going the former route of get users, worry about monetization later. And with Cluso, we're doing the exact opposite. With Cluso, there is no free plan. There is no way that you can come onto the Cluso website and just sign up and use the product. You have to get on a call with us. We have to qualify you as a, actual customer who can pay a recurring amount of money before we even like onboard you and let you use the product, right? So, yeah, I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I will say my advice for college students varies a bit when versus, someone who's a little bit more sure about doing a startup. The reason for that is when you're a college student, I think it is slightly trickier to convince big businesses to pay you money. Like even we initially had that problem only after getting funded by YC did the monetization aspect like really stop being a blocker where they're like, okay, these are just some kids building software. I wouldn't say that's too much of a detractor, but when you're in college, I think the priority, like biggest failure mode is you're just not going to follow through with building your product. So that's why if you're in college and you're building, I'd say your priority should be just getting users and figuring things out as you grow along, just to make sure you stay motivated and you have things in place. But otherwise, I am very strongly in favor of chase revenue first, because especially when you're building an AI product, because it's very easy for costs to spiral out. Like costs tend to be proportional to usage. So having some amount of monetization built in makes a lot of sense.
Hey, thank you. And maybe just a quick other question. So in terms of
Sure,
technology,
that's it.
right? So how do you figure out a scaling or growth strategy?
Yeah, that's
Like
a great
because
question. I think
you're using commodities like LLMs, and I agree that you might not want to innovate on the foundation models, but how do you figure out where do you grow, how do you grow, and how do you figure out more pain
right,
points, and just wondering
absolutely.
how a founder starts work in that direction.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main motivation is it's best not to try and solve too far ahead for bottlenecks, right? So the best example I can give is how at Cluso, one of the most critical tasks is video processing. So So whatever I showed you in that demo, at the end of that, when you export the video, that's a very compute heavy job, right? So the computer engineer in me tells me, okay, what I need to do for that is build a good, robust, maybe queuing system where every single export is treated as like a job in a queue. There's a worker that's spawned just to handle that job. So the rest of the API remains stable. That would be like the, maybe towards ideal version of that, right? But in practice, what we've kind of learned is it's best to try to solve for bottlenecks once you hit them. So for us, for example, right now, a single monolithic service that houses both the API and the video processing routines is working fine, and we just scale that horizontally. When there's more usage, just spawn a new instance that does everything, even if it's just focused on video processing, and that's okay for now. So yeah, with founders, I think the most common mentality is it's a problem for tomorrow. If I can push it to tomorrow, try and keep pushing it to tomorrow because there are more pressing problems for today. So for example, for us, more than the scalability of video processing, it's ensuring consistency. So there's actually a different render pipeline on the front end and on the back end, and keeping that consistent is starting to prove a challenge. So we might want to revamp the whole methodology of how we render the videos. So technical decisions mostly come down to that. A lot of your code gets rewritten in that process.
I see. All right. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And yeah, best wishes.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Okay, there's a question on chat. How did you know that your co-founders would be a good fit as a team? Trial by fire, I think, is the best answer. Like because we were working together, we started to see like complementary skill sets. So I'm very technically inclined. My co-founder Akash has like a great eye. Like he's a painter, and I think especially in a software startup, design is a very, very important skill. Neil is like business in his blood. Like he comes from like a traditional textile business family, and he just loves talking to people. Like negotiation is built into him. So we felt like we had those complementary skill sets even in our brief time kind of working together. More than that, we were all like very close friends. So communication between your co-founders is very important. Like if there are things on your mind, whether it's uncertainty with the startup, any kind of personal issues, or like some sort of rift between you two, you just want to be comfortable enough where you can bring it up very easily. So like a co-founder relationship is very, very intimate. Like three of us share an apartment, we live together, we spend basically our entire day together now. So most important marker of a good fit as a team is just that level of communication and being able to gel well together. Awesome. Yeah, I think we are over time, Professor.
Yeah, which is a very
No
good
worries
sign.
on my end. Yeah, I'm happy so many of you stuck on. It's a very validating.
Yeah, this is probably the first talk I am hearing where there are so many questions. Usually the technical talks, yeah, there are a few questions, but nonetheless, this has stood out very well. So in case there are no other questions, I would like to thank Prajwal and wish him best for his future endeavors. Gopal, do you want to say something?
No, I was just wondering how easy or hard has it become to register startups in India, and how is that process?
Oh, very good question. Yeah. So it's actually quite complicated, especially if you get funded by YC, because YC can only invest in a US entity. So we have a US entity that has a wholly owned India subsidiary, and that whole thing was quite complicated to set up. So we own shares in like the US entity, the Indian entity had to be acquired. That whole process was very messy. So again, this is where I love that adage of you have a limited amount of innovation, don't innovate here. So we just got some lawyers to do all of this, sign the documents, and it was all kind of sorted. If you're setting up just an Indian entity, I think the process has become a bit easier though, especially with that gift city in Surat and everything. It's definitely easier.
All right, thank you.
Awesome.
Any other final comments, questions from anyone? All right. So thanks, Prajwal, for spending time with us and sharing your valuable inputs. I'm sure it will be beneficial. We'll be uploading this video on the CSE IITM web channel and their YouTube channel. And I hope that others who view it will also find this very useful. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you all for listening. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if I can help in any other way, especially if you're a student starting up.
Definitely.
All right.
All right. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you.